The transport ship Meridian shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, its metal hull groaning under the stress of deceleration. In the cargo hold, 23 beings from across the galaxy sat strapped into their seats, each recruited for the same desperate mission. The Kethvar Empire had been pushing deeper into Coalition space for months, and this backwater planet called Zirian 7 was their latest target. Captain Vexhai, a towering Altarian with 4 arms and skin like polished granite, stood at the front of the hold. His voice boomed through the universal translators as he addressed the mixed group of mercenaries, soldiers, and volunteers. "Listen well, warriors," Vexhai began, his secondary arms gesturing toward a holographic display that flickered to life. "Zirian 7 may look like nothing special, but it sits on the largest deposit of quantum crystals this side of the galactic core. If the Kethvar control those crystals, they'll have enough power to fuel their war machine for the next 1,000 years." The hologram showed a brown and green planet with 3 small moons. Red indicators marked Kethvar positions across the northern continent, while blue dots showed the remaining Coalition forces clustered around a mountain range in the south. "The Coalition garrison is down to their last 1,000 defenders," Vexhai continued. "They're good soldiers, but they're outnumbered 10 to 1. That's where we come in. We're not here to win the war. We're here to buy time for the evacuation ships to get the civilians out, then destroy the crystal mines so the Kethvar can't use them." A low murmur ran through the assembled fighters. Most were veterans who had seen enough wars to know a suicide mission when they heard one. But the pay was good, and the cause was just enough to keep them in their seats. Vexhai's eyes swept across the group, cataloging each fighter. There was Zaranuz, a Veltari sniper whose 4 eyes could track targets at impossible distances. Beside her sat Krog, a massive Threnodai warrior whose hide could stop most energy weapons. Near the back, 3 Centauri brothers whispered among themselves, their scaled hands checking and rechecking their plasma rifles. And then there was the human. He sat alone in the corner, so still he might have been carved from stone. While every other fighter in the hold wore some form of armor or carried visible weapons, the human wore only simple gray fatigues and a long cloth bundle strapped across his back. His dark hair was cut short in a military style, but no rank insignia marked his collar. Most striking of all, he hadn't spoken a single word since boarding the ship 3 days ago. Vexhai had seen humans before. They were known throughout the galaxy as competent fighters, though nothing special compared to the natural warriors like the Threnodai or the psychic abilities of the Veltari. This one was young by human standards, maybe 25 of their years, with the lean build of someone who stayed in excellent physical condition. But there was something about his stillness that made even the captain uneasy. "Questions?" Vexhai asked the group. Krog raised one massive hand. "What kind of opposition are we looking at, Captain?" "Standard Kethvar forces," Vexhai replied. "Energy weapons, powered armor, and air support. They've got numbers, but they're not expecting reinforcements. We hit them hard and fast, create enough chaos to cover the evacuation, then fall back to the mines for the final phase." "And after we blow the mines?" asked one of the Centauri brothers. Vexhai was quiet for a moment. "Extraction ships will be standing by. Anyone who makes it to the pickup zone gets a ride home, and their full payment." The unspoken message was clear. Not everyone would make it to the pickup zone. "What about him?" Zaranuz pointed one of her 4 eyes toward the silent human. "We've been traveling for 3 days, and he hasn't said a word. How do we know he's not a spy or a saboteur?" All eyes turned to the human. He didn't react to the attention, didn't even seem to notice it. His gaze remained fixed on some point in the middle distance, his breathing slow and regular. "His credentials check out," Vexhai said, though his tone suggested he had his own doubts. "Marcus Chun, former Earth Defense Force. Served with distinction in the Rigel conflict. No disciplinary actions on his record." "Former," Krog rumbled. "Why did he leave his service?" Vexhai glanced at a datapad in his lower left hand. "Medical discharge. Psychological trauma from combat operations." But his skills were rated as exceptional. The human, Marcus, finally moved. His head turned slightly toward the captain, and for a moment his dark eyes met Vexhi's gaze. The captain felt a chill run down his spine. Those eyes held depths that seemed far older than the young face they sat in. "I can fight," Marcus said quietly. His voice was soft, barely audible over the ship's engines, but somehow every being in the hold heard him clearly. "That's all you need to know." The simple statement carried such conviction that several of the other fighters shifted uncomfortably. There was something in his tone that suggested terrible certainty, as if fighting was not just what he did, but what he was. "Good enough for me," Vexhi said, though he made a mental note to keep an eye on the human during the mission. "We'll be planetside in 6 hours. Rest, check your gear, and prepare for insertion." As the other fighters began to move around the hold, some heading to the weapons locker while others settled in for sleep, Marcus remained motionless. His hand moved to the cloth bundle on his back, fingers tracing its length with an almost reverent touch. Whatever was wrapped inside was long and slender, roughly the shape of a sword, though most of the galaxy had moved beyond such primitive weapons centuries ago. Zaranuz approached him cautiously. Her species was naturally curious, and the human silence had been bothering her for days. "I'm Zaranuz," she said, settling into the seat across from him. "I know you, Marcus. We're going to be fighting together soon. Maybe we should talk." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. His eyes seemed to catalog everything about her. The way she held herself, the modified rifle across her lap, the small scars that marked her as an experienced fighter. "You're wondering if I'll break under pressure," he said finally. "If the trauma that got me discharged will make me a liability." Zaranuz blinked her 4 eyes in surprise. Most species found it difficult to read Veltari expressions, but somehow the human had seen right through her. "The thought had occurred to me," she admitted. "We're walking into a meat grinder down there. I need to know the people beside me won't fold when things get bad." "They won't get bad," Marcus said simply. "They'll get worse than bad. They'll get hellish. People will die in ways you've never imagined, and the lucky ones will die quickly." His matter-of-fact tone made Zaranuz shiver. "That's not exactly reassuring." "It's not meant to be reassuring. It's meant to be true." Marcus leaned back in his seat, his hand still resting on the wrapped bundle. "But I won't break. I've already been broken. What comes next is just physics." Before Zaranuz could ask what he meant by that, the ship's intercom crackled to life. "Attention all personnel, we are beginning our approach to Zirian 7. Combat insertion in T-minus 5 hours and counting." The next few hours passed in relative quiet. Some of the fighters slept, others checked, and rechecked their equipment. Marcus never moved from his seat, never closed his eyes, never spoke again. He simply sat in perfect stillness, like a statue waiting for its moment to come to life. As they entered the planet's atmosphere, the ship began to shake more violently. Through the small viewports, flashes of light could be seen in the distance. The ongoing battle between coalition forces and the Kethvar invasion. Captain Vexhi returned to the hold, now wearing full combat armor that made his already imposing figure even more massive. "Final briefing," he called out. "We're going in hot. The Kethvar have been pounding the coalition positions all day, but our forces are still holding the mountain passes. We'll be dropped 5 kilometers behind enemy lines, and we'll have to fight our way to the coalition perimeter." He activated the holographic display again, showing their insertion point and the planned route to friendly lines. "Remember, our job is to create chaos and confusion. Hit supply lines, take out communication arrays, make the Kethvar think they're facing a much larger force than they actually are." "What if we get separated?" asked one of the Centauri brothers. "You know the rally points. If you can't reach coalition lines, head for the extraction zone. But don't wait around. The pickup window is only 6 hours after the mines blow." The ship shuddered as it took evasive action, probably dodging Kethvar air patrols. Several fighters gripped their seats as they were thrown around the hold. 2 minutes to insertion," came the pilot's voice over the intercom. The fighters began moving toward the drop bay, checking their gear one final time. Marcus stood smoothly, the first quick movement he had made in hours. He shouldered his pack and made sure the cloth bundle was secure across his back. "What's in the bundle?" Krog asked as they lined up for the drop. The massive Threnodai had been wondering about it for days. Marcus looked up at the 8-foot-tall warrior. "Memories," he said simply. Before Krog could ask for clarification, the drop bay doors opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure. Wind howled through the opening, and far below the planet's surface was visible through scattered clouds. Explosions flickered like fireflies across the landscape. "Go! Go! Go!" Vethai shouted. One by one, the fighters leaped from the ship. Zaranuz went first, her 4 eyes scanning the ground as she fell. The Centauri brothers followed. Then, Krog's massive form plummeted like a stone. Marcus was the last to jump. For a moment, he stood at the edge of the drop bay, wind whipping his hair, looking down at the war-torn planet below. Then he stepped forward and fell into the chaos below, as silent as he had been for the entire journey. The drop took 3 minutes. Personal gravity dampeners slowed their fall in the final 100 meters, allowing for relatively soft landings in a forested valley behind Kethvar lines. The fighters quickly regrouped, using hand signals to maintain silence as they oriented themselves. The sounds of war were much clearer now. Artillery rumbled in the distance, punctuated by the sharp crack of energy weapons and the occasional roar of aircraft passing overhead. The air smelled of smoke and ozone. Vexhai consulted his tactical display and pointed toward a ridge line to the east. Their first target was a Kethvar supply depot hidden in the woods beyond. Intel suggested it was lightly guarded, a perfect place to announce their arrival. The team moved through the forest with practiced stealth. Each fighter was an experienced warrior, capable of moving silently despite their varied physiologies. Marcus brought up the rear, his footsteps making no sound at all as he glided between the trees like a shadow. They crested the ridge and looked down at their target. The supply depot was larger than expected, rows of prefabricated buildings surrounded by an energy barrier fence. Guard towers marked the perimeter, each manned by 2 Kethvar soldiers in their distinctive black armor. 20 guards visible, Zaranuz whispered after scanning the compound through a rifle scope. Probably twice that many inside the buildings. Vexhai nodded grimly. Their intel had been wrong. This wasn't a lightly defended supply point. It was a major staging area. But they were committed now. Same plan, he decided. Hit them hard and fast. Zaranuz, take out the tower guards. Krog, punch through the main gate. Centauri team, suppress any reinforcements. Everyone else, follow me to the command building. What about me? Marcus asked quietly. For the first time since boarding the transport, all eyes turned to the silent human. Vexhai realized he had no idea what the young man was actually capable of. His file mentioned exceptional skills, but gave no details. Stay with the group, Vexhai said finally. Support where needed. Marcus nodded once, then reached back and began unwrapping the cloth bundle. The fabric fell away to reveal an ancient sword unlike anything the other fighters had ever seen. The blade was over 3 feet long, slightly curved, with an edge that seemed to catch and hold light in impossible ways. The metal looked old, but perfectly maintained, without a single spot of rust or wear. A sword, Krog rumbled in disbelief. This is a modern battlefield, human. That relic won't help you against energy weapons and powered armor. Marcus tested the balance of the blade with a few slow practice cuts. The weapon moved like liquid mercury in his hands, each motion precise and controlled. "You'd be surprised," he said softly. Then, without waiting for orders, he began moving down the slope toward the enemy compound. His approach was so smooth and silent that he seemed to flow like water between the trees. "Wait!" Vexhai hissed, but the human was already gone. The team watched in stunned silence as Marcus approached the perimeter fence. A Kethvar guard in one of the towers swept his searchlight across the forest, the beam passing just meters from where the human crouched in the shadows. Marcus drew his sword fully, the blade singing softly as it cleared its sheath. Then he moved. What happened next would be debated by military historians for decades to come. Marcus didn't run toward the fence. He flowed like liquid death. The first guard never knew what hit him. One moment he was scanning the treeline, the next his severed head was toppling from his shoulders. The second guard spun around, energy rifle already charging, but Marcus was no longer where he had been. The ancient sword took the Kethvar warrior in the chest, punching through his advanced armor like it was made of paper. Alarms began blaring throughout the compound. Guards poured from the buildings, their weapons lighting up the night with energy bolts. But Marcus was already among them, his sword cutting through armor, weapons, and flesh with equal ease. "By the void," Zaranuz whispered. "He's not human. He can't be human." But he was human. Terrifyingly, impossibly human. And as he moved through the enemy forces like a force of nature, the other fighters began to understand why he had been so silent during the journey. Some warriors were made by training and experience. Others were forged by trauma and loss. But a very few were born to be weapons, and those few learned to fear themselves more than any enemy. Marcus Chun was one of those few, and now his silence was ending. The battlefield was about to change forever. / the Kethvar supply depot erupted into chaos as Marcus moved through their ranks like death personified. Energy bolts filled the air around him, but he seemed to anticipate each shot before it was fired, his body flowing away from the beams of deadly light with inhuman grace. Captain Vexai watched in stunned disbelief as the silent human carved a path of destruction through enemies that should have overwhelmed him easily. The Kethvar were considered among the galaxy's finest warriors, their black armor nearly impervious to small arms fire, their energy weapons capable of cutting through tank armor. Yet this young man, with an ancient sword, was dismantling them like they were children playing at war. "Move!" Vexai roared, breaking his team out of their shocked stupor. "Support him!" Zaranuz was the first to react, her modified rifle barking as she picked off guards in the remaining towers. Her 4 eyes tracked multiple targets simultaneously, each shot finding its mark with surgical precision. Krog charged down the slope with a battle cry that shook the trees, his massive form bulldozing through the compound's energy barrier like it was made of gossamer. The Centauri brothers moved as one, their coordinated fire patterns suppressing any Kethvar attempt to organize a defensive line. But even as the rest of the team engaged, all eyes kept drifting back to Marcus and his impossible dance of death. A squad of Kethvar heavy infantry emerged from the main barracks building, their powered armor gleaming dully in the compound's emergency lighting. Each warrior stood over 7 feet tall, encased in enough armor to stop a direct hit from an artillery shell. They moved in perfect formation, energy cannons charging with ominous whines. Marcus didn't even slow down. The lead warrior fired first, a bolt of superheated plasma that should have vaporized anything in its path. Marcus twisted aside at the last possible instant, the energy beam scorching the ground where he had been standing. Before the warrior could fire again, the human was inside his reach. The ancient sword moved in a silver arc that seemed to bend reality around it. The powered armor that had taken decades to develop and cost more than most starships split apart like wet paper. The Kethvar warrior inside didn't even have time to scream. "Impossible," breathed one of the remaining heavy infantry. "No blade can cut through quantum-hardened armor plating." Marcus turned toward the speaker, his face showing no emotion at all. In the emergency lighting, his eyes reflected red like those of a predator caught in a spotlight. "You're right," he said quietly, his voice somehow audible over the chaos of battle. "No normal blade can." The remaining heavy infantry opened fire together, filling the air with enough plasma to melt a small building. Marcus vanished into the storm of energy, and for a moment, even his own teammates thought he had been vaporized. Then, the screaming started. Marcus emerged from the plasma storm like a nightmare made flesh, his sword already claiming its next victim. The heavy infantry tried to fall back, but there was nowhere to run. Their powered armor, their advanced weapons, their tactical training. None of it mattered against an enemy who moved like flowing water and struck like lightning. Within minutes, the compound was silent except for the crackle of damaged electronics and the distant rumble of the ongoing war. Vexhai approached cautiously, his four arms holding his weapons ready despite knowing the battle was over. The other fighters followed, stepping carefully around the debris of what had been considered some of the galaxy's finest military equipment. Marcus stood in the center of the carnage, perfectly still once again. His sword hung loose in his grip, the blade somehow clean despite the destruction around him. Not a single drop of blood marred its surface, and his gray fatigue showed no sign of the battle he had just fought. "Ow!" Zaranuz whispered, her four eyes wide with shock. That armor was rated to stop heavy plasma cannons. That sword looks like it was forged in a museum. Marcus turned to face her, and she involuntarily took a step back. There was something different about his eyes now, as if the silence that had held him for days was finally breaking apart. "It was forged on Earth," he said simply, "by my grandfather, and his grandfather before him, and his grandfather before him, going back 800 years. "But that's impossible," protested one of the Centauri brothers. "Humans have only been in space for 3 centuries. Before that, your people barely had metalworking technology." A small smile played at the corners of Marcus's mouth, the first expression anyone had seen on his face since boarding the transport. "We've always known how to make things that cut," he said. "We just got better at it." Captain Vexhai was examining the destroyed heavy armor, his tactical mind trying to process what he was seeing. The cuts were impossibly clean, as if the armor had simply decided to fall apart. There were no burn marks from energy weapons, no crushing damage from kinetic weapons. Just perfect surgical cuts that had somehow passed through molecular bonds like they didn't exist. "Your file said you were discharged for psychological trauma," Vexhai said carefully. "What happened to you, Marcus Chun?" The smile faded from Marcus's face, and for a moment the terrible stillness returned. "I learned what I was," he said finally, "and what that meant for everyone around me." Before anyone could ask for clarification, new alarms began sounding across the valley. In the distance, flashes of light marked the position of the main Kethvar forces as they began to mobilize. "They know we're here," Krog rumbled. This compound was just the beginning. Vexhai checked his tactical display, his expression growing grim. "The entire Kethvar army is moving. They're pulling back from the coalition lines and converging on our position." "How many?" asked Zaranuz. 50,000, maybe more." A moment of silence fell over the team as they processed the numbers. 23 fighters against 50,000 of the galaxy's most feared warriors. Even with Marcus's impossible abilities, the odds were beyond hopeless. "Orders, Captain?" asked one of the Centauri brothers. Vexhai was quiet for a long moment, studying his display. The original plan had called for hidden, run tactics, striking at supply lines and communication hubs to create confusion. But the Kethvar had abandoned subtlety. They were coming in force, which meant the coalition evacuation would have to accelerate. "We stick to the mission," he decided, "but we modify the tactics. If the entire Kethvar army is converging on us, that gives the coalition time to get their people out. We need to keep them focused on hunting us for as long as possible." "That's a death sentence," Zaranuz pointed out. "Yes," Vexhai agreed, "but it's the job we signed up for." Marcus was already moving toward the compound's communication center, his sword sliding back into its sheath with a soft whisper of metal on leather. "I can get us more time," he said. "Ow!" Vexhai asked. Marcus paused at the entrance to the communications building. "By giving them something to really worry about." The communication center was a sophisticated array of quantum transmitters and data processing equipment. Marcus studied the setup for a moment, then began working with surprising expertise. His fingers flew over the control surfaces, accessing Kethvar military networks with an ease that suggested extensive training in electronic warfare. "You know their systems?" Krog observed. "Earth Defense Force cross-trained us on all major galactic powers," Marcus replied without looking up from his work. Standard procedure in case we ever fought alongside or against coalition allies. The screens around him flickered as he gained access to deeper levels of the Kethvar military network. Tactical displays, unit positions, command protocols, all of it laid bare before his quiet expertise. "What you doing? Vethai demandet?" Marcus's fingers paused over a final control sequence. "I'm sending a message to their high command." "What kind of message?" Marcus looked up from the screens, and, for the first time since they had met him, his eyes held something other than that terrible stillness. They held anticipation, the kind that makes them send everything they have. He pressed the final sequence, and, across the Kethvar military network, a simple message began broadcasting on all frequencies. "Earth Defense Force Special Operations, 1st Regiment. We are here." The effect was immediate. Across the tactical displays, Kethvar units that had been moving in orderly formations suddenly began accelerating. New units appeared as reserves were called up from across the planet. Within minutes, the estimated enemy force had doubled. "You're insane," Zaranuz breathed. "You just painted a target on all of us." "No," Marcus said quietly. "I painted a target on myself." The Kethvar knew about Earth's Special Operations Forces. Every military power in the galaxy did. Humans might not be the strongest or fastest warriors, but when they decided to kill something, they showed a creativity and persistence that bordered on the psychotic. Earth's special forces were legendary for their ability to cause damage far beyond their numbers. The message Marcus had sent suggested that an entire regiment of Earth's finest was operating on Zirian 7. The Kethvar couldn't ignore that threat, even if it meant abandoning their assault on the coalition positions. "They'll come for us with everything," Vexhai said, understanding dawning in his 4 eyes. "Their entire army." "Yes," Marcus agreed. "And while they're hunting 23 ghosts, the coalition evacuation continues." The irony wasn't lost on any of them. By pretending to be something they weren't, they had bought the coalition precious time. But they had also signed their own death warrants. "How long do we have?" asked one of the Centauri brothers. Marcus studied the displays showing incoming Kethvar forces. "Maybe 6 hours before they surround us completely. Less if they bring their full air support." "Then we better move," Vexhai decided. "Next target is the communication relay on Hill 347. If we can take it out, we'll blind their coordination for this entire sector." The team quickly gathered what supplies they could from the destroyed compound, then melted back into the forest. Behind them, the sound of approaching aircraft grew steadily louder. As they moved through the darkened woods, Zaranuz found herself walking beside Marcus. The human had returned to his previous silence, but there was something different about him now. The terrible stillness was still there, but underneath it, she sensed something stirring. "That sword," she said quietly. "It's not just a family heirloom, is it?" Marcus was quiet for so long that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, without looking at her, he spoke. "My family has been making weapons for 800 years, he said. Each generation passed down not just the knowledge of how to forge steel, but why we forge it. This blade has tasted blood in wars you've never heard of, on worlds whose names are lost to history. But how can it cut through modern armor?" "Because it's not just steel," Marcus replied. "It's purpose made manifest. Every fold of metal, every edge alignment, every tempering cycle, all of it focused on a single function: to cut through whatever stands in the way of justice." Zaranuz felt a chill run through her at the conviction in his voice. And what happens when there's no justice to be found? When the wars are just politics and power? Marcus stopped walking. In the darkness of the forest, his eyes seemed to glow with their own light. "That's when warriors like me break," he said simply. "Because we're weapons, not people. And weapons without purpose are just tools waiting for someone to misuse them." The sound of aircraft was getting closer. Somewhere in the distance, energy weapons began firing, lighting up the night sky with deadly fireworks. "But this is justice," Zaranuz said. "Protecting those evacuees, buying them time to escape. This is what your sword was made for." Marcus began walking again, but His pace was different now. More purposeful, more fluid. As if something that had been sleeping was finally waking up. Yes, he said quietly. This is what it was made for. Behind them, the first Kethvar search teams reached the destroyed supply depot. The sight of their elite heavy infantry cut down by impossible means sent shock waves through their command structure. Reports of a lone warrior with an ancient blade began filtering through their communications networks. Within the hour, the Kethvar had a name for their mysterious enemy, the Ghost Sword. And they began to understand that they were hunting something far more dangerous than a normal special operations team. They were hunting a human who had remembered what he was. The real war was just beginning. The communication relay on Hill 347 perched on the mountainside like a metallic spider, its arrays and transmitters reaching toward the stars. Captain Vexai studied the fortified position through his tactical scope, counting guard posts and defensive emplacements. 30 visible defenders, he murmured to his team. Probably twice that many inside the facility. Heavy energy cannons, automated defense turrets, and a clear field of fire in every direction. The team had been moving for 3 hours since leaving the destroyed supply depot, staying ahead of pursuing Kethvar forces through careful route planning and Zaranuz's exceptional scouting abilities. But the enemy net was tightening with each passing minute. "We've got company behind us," Zaranuz reported softly, her 4 eyes scanning the valley below through her rifle scope. 3 search teams, maybe 40 soldiers total. They're following our trail. Marcus knelt silently beside a fallen log, his hand resting on his sword's grip. Since the battle at the supply depot, something had changed in his demeanor. The terrible stillness was still there, but now it felt less like emptiness and more like potential energy waiting to be released. "Can we go around?" asked Krog, his massive frame somehow managing to stay hidden behind a cluster of boulders. Vexai shook his head. "Not enough time. Those pursuit teams will catch us before we can circle the mountain, and then we'll be caught in the open between them and the relay defenders." "So we go through," said one of the Centauri brothers. 30-1 odds, uphill assault against a fortified position. Vexai calculated grimly. "We'll be slaughtered before we get halfway up the slope." "Not necessarily," Marcus said quietly. All eyes turned to the human. He was studying the relay station with the intensity of a predator examining prey. "You have a plan?" Vexai asked. Marcus stood smoothly, his movements fluid and controlled. "I have a sword." "That's not a plan. That's suicide," Zaranuz protested. "Those defensive positions will cut you down the moment you break cover." Marcus looked at her with those dark eyes that seemed to hold depths no young face should contain. "They'll try." Before anyone could stop him, Marcus began walking up the slope toward the fortified relay station. He didn't run, didn't attempt to use stealth or cover. He simply walked, his stride steady and purposeful, as if he were taking a casual stroll through a garden rather than advancing into the teeth of a prepared defensive position. The first Kethvar sentry spotted him when he was still 200 meters from the perimeter. Alarm klaxons began wailing as defenders rushed to their positions. Energy cannons swiveled to track the lone figure walking up the mountain. "Open fire," came the command from the relay station speakers. "All units, open fire." The mountainside erupted in a storm of energy beams and plasma bolts. The concentrated firepower was enough to level a small building, turning the air itself into a deadly aurora of superheated particles. Marcus walked through it all. Energy beams passed through spaces where he had been moments before, as if he could see the future and step aside from attacks that hadn't been fired yet. Plasma bolts scorched the ground around his feet, but never quite managed to find their target. "Impossible," breathed the Kethvar commander watching from the relay station's command center. "Retarget all systems. Concentrate fire on grid square 77. Every defensive weapon on the mountain focused on a single 10-meter square of ground. The combined firepower would have vaporized a main battle tank." Marcus flowed like water around the edges of the killing zone, never quite where the targeting computers predicted he would be. His ancient sword remained sheathed, his pace never changing from that steady, inevitable walk. At 100 meters from the perimeter, the automated defense turrets joined the barrage. High-energy pulse lasers designed to stop armored vehicles tracked the human's movement with mechanical precision. Marcus finally drew his sword. The blade caught and held light in ways that hurt to look at directly, as if it existed partially outside normal space. As energy beams converged on his position, Marcus began to move the sword in precise patterns around his body. The impossible happened. Energy beams struck the blade and split, deflecting away harmlessly. Plasma bolts touched the metal and dispersed into nothing. The sword wasn't just cutting through matter, it was cutting through energy itself. "By the void," whispered the Kethvar commander. "What is that thing?" At 50 meters, Marcus finally accelerated. But even then, he didn't run. He flowed forward like liquid death, his sword weaving a pattern of protection around him that made targeting impossible. The first defensive line fell in seconds. Kethvar warriors in full combat armor found themselves cut down by a blade that passed through their defenses like they were made of smoke. Energy shields flickered and died as the impossible sword touched them, their quantum matrices simply unraveling in the presence of something that shouldn't exist. "Fall back," the commander ordered. "All units to the inner perimeter." But there was nowhere to run. Marcus moved through the defenders like a force of nature, his blade singing softly as it carved reality itself into new shapes. Each cut was precise, surgical, taking only what was necessary to remove threats while leaving the relay equipment undamaged. The team at the bottom of the hill watched in stunned silence as their human companion dismantled an entire fortified position single-handedly. Energy weapons fell silent one by one as their operators were neutralized by something that belonged in ancient history, not on a modern battlefield. "How is he doing that?" Krog rumbled in amazement. Vexhai was studying his tactical display, watching as the relay station's defensive grid went dark section by section. "I don't know. According to our sensors, that sword isn't made of any known material. It's showing energy readings that are off the scale." "It's not just the sword," Zaranuz said quietly. Her 4 eyes were tracking Marcus's movement through her rifle scope, watching the impossible grace with which he moved. "Look at the way he fights. He's not reacting to their attacks. He's anticipating them." It was true. Marcus moved as if he could see several seconds into the future, stepping aside from attacks before they were even fired. His sword intercepted energy beams with impossible precision, as if he knew exactly where each shot would be aimed. "Precognition?" asked one of the Centauri brothers. "No," Vexhai said slowly, a terrible understanding beginning to dawn on him. "Training. He's fought so many battles, faced so many enemies, that he can predict their moves before they make them. He's not seeing the future. He's reading the present with perfect clarity." The relay station fell silent. On the mountainside, Marcus stood alone among the disabled defensive positions, his sword once again clean and gleaming despite the destruction around him. The relay equipment remained undamaged, its arrays still reaching toward the stars. The team made their way up the slope, stepping carefully around the deactivated weapons and unconscious defenders. Marcus hadn't killed anyone. Each cut had been precise enough to disable without causing fatal damage. "They're alive," Vexhai observed with surprise. "All of them. They're soldiers following orders," Marcus replied simply. "No different from us." He approached the main transmitter array, his hands moving over the controls with practiced expertise. Within minutes, he had accessed the Kethvar communication network and begun uploading a virus of his own design. "What are you doing?" Zaranuz asked. "Creating confusion," Marcus said as his fingers danced across the control surfaces. "Their entire command structure depends on real-time communication. Without it, 50,000 soldiers become 50,000 individuals trying to guess what their orders should be." The virus propagated through the network with devastating efficiency, corrupting data streams and introducing random delays into command channels. Across the planet, Kethvar units began receiving conflicting orders, outdated intelligence, and false position reports. That should buy the evacuation another 6 hours, Marcus calculated, stepping back from the controls. And how long before they repair the damage? Vexai asked. If they figure out it's a software attack, and not hardware damage, maybe 2 hours. If they think we damaged the physical infrastructure and start replacing equipment, could be days. A new sound reached their ears from the valley below, the rumble of approaching vehicles. The pursuit teams had reached the base of the mountain and were beginning their ascent. Time to go, Krog observed. But as they prepared to leave, Marcus paused at the edge of the relay platform. His eyes were fixed on something in the distance, and his expression had changed again. The terrible stillness was fading, replaced by something that might have been recognition. What is it? Zaranuz asked. Marcus pointed toward a cluster of lights on a distant mountainside. Coalition Evacuation Site Alpha. They're still loading civilians. Vexai checked his display. That's 15 kilometers from here. Even if we could reach it, we'd lead the entire Kethvar army right to them. The evacuation was supposed to be completed hours ago, Marcus said, his voice carrying a note of concern that hadn't been there before. Something's gone wrong. He accessed the relay station's long-range scanners, bringing up a detailed view of the evacuation site. What they saw made them all go cold. The evacuation ships were grounded, surrounded by Kethvar armored units. Thousands of civilians were trapped in the loading areas, held at gunpoint while enemy commanders negotiated with coalition forces. Hostages, Vexai said grimly. They're using the civilians as leverage to prevent the coalition from destroying the mining facilities. How many? Marcus asked, his voice deadly quiet. 20,000 civilians. 5,000 coalition defenders. Vexai studied the tactical display. The Kethvar have them completely surrounded. Any rescue attempt would result in a massacre. Marcus was silent for a long moment, his hand resting on his sword's grip. When he spoke again, his voice carried a finality that made everyone listen. Then, we don't attempt a rescue, he said. We make them want to leave. What do you mean? Zaranuz asked. Marcus turned away from the scanners, and, in the reflected light of the relay arrays, his eyes seemed to burn with their own fire. I mean, it's time to stop playing soldier, he said quietly, and start being what I really am. The transformation was subtle, but unmistakable. The human who had walked among them for days, silent and contained, was finally letting something ancient and terrible wake up. His posture changed, becoming more fluid and predatory. His movements took on a grace that seemed almost inhuman. Marcus, Vexai said carefully. What are you? Marcus looked at each of them in turn, and for the first time since they had met him, he smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. I'm the reason humans don't start wars, he said simply. I'm what happens when they finish them. The sound of approaching vehicles grew louder. In the distance, the trapped evacuation ships waited helplessly as 25,000 lives hung in the balance. Marcus began walking toward the edge of the platform, his stride purposeful and deadly. Where are you going? Krog called after him. To end this, Marcus replied without looking back. And with that, he stepped off the platform and began making his way toward the distant evacuation site, leaving his stunned teammates to realize that they had never really known him at all. The silent human was silent no more, and the battlefield was about to learn what true terror looked like. The evacuation site sprawled across a wide plateau, like a scene from humanity's worst nightmares. Transport ships sat grounded and helpless, their loading ramps down, but their engines cold. Thousands of civilians, humans, Altarians, Veltari, and dozens of other species huddled in marked areas under the watchful guns of Kethvar soldiers. General Thaxmore, commander of the Kethvar Planetary Invasion Force, stood on a raised platform overlooking the hostages. His black armor gleamed in the harsh floodlights, and his voice carried clearly through the universal translators as he addressed the coalition forces. Your position is untenable, he announced. Surrender the mining coordinates, and access codes, and these civilians will be transported safely to neutral space. Refuse, and they will be executed beginning with the youngest. Colonel Sarah Chun of the Earth Defense Force stood at the Coalition command post, her jaw clenched in frustrated rage. She commanded the evacuation security forces, but with 20,000 civilians in the line of fire, her hands were tied. "You know we can't do that, General," she replied through the communication link. "Those mines contain enough quantum crystals to fuel your war machine for a millennium." "Then, these people die for your principles," Thaxmore said coldly. "You have 1 hour to decide." What none of them knew was that 15 kilometers away, Marcus Chun had heard every word of the exchange through the relay station's communication intercepts. And what none of them could have imagined was the effect that hearing his sister's voice would have on the silent warrior. Marcus stood at the edge of a cliff overlooking the valley between him and the evacuation site, his ancient sword hanging at his side. His teammates had tried to follow him, but he had moved too fast, flowing through the forest like a shadow while they stumbled over roots and rocks behind him. "Sarah," he whispered, the first time he had spoken his sister's name in 2 years. The memories came flooding back, memories he had buried under layers of training and discipline. Sarah teaching him to fly when they were children. Sarah holding him when their parents died in the Rigel War. Sarah's face when he had been discharged from active duty, her eyes full of worry and love and fear. He had left Earth to get away from her, to keep her safe from what he had become. Now she was here, trapped with 20,000 innocents, while an enemy general held a gun to their heads. The terrible stillness that had defined Marcus for months finally shattered completely. "Target acquired," he said quietly to himself, and began moving down the cliff face. What happened next would be studied by military tacticians for generations. Marcus didn't approach the Kethvar positions like a soldier. He approached them like a force of nature. He flowed through their outer perimeter without triggering a single alarm, past guards who never saw him coming. The first indication that something had gone wrong came when Kethvar squads began reporting in with status updates that made no sense. Perimeter Team 7 to command. "Our heavy weapons they're in pieces. Clean cuts. No burn marks, no explosive damage. Someone cut through a plasma cannon with something sharper than a molecular blade." Perimeter Team 12 reporting. "The ammunition depot is secured, but all the energy cells have been drained. Completely drained. They look like they've been surgically punctured." General Thaxmore listened to the reports with growing unease. His forces were being systematically neutralized, but there were no signs of battle. No explosions, no energy weapon discharges, no evidence of fighting at all. Equipment simply stopped working. Guards were found unconscious but unharmed. Weapons were discovered destroyed with impossible precision. "Sir," his aide reported nervously, "we've lost contact with 17 perimeter teams in the last 15 minutes. 17. Thaxmore's voice carried a note of disbelief. "What are our sensors showing?" "Nothing, sir. No energy signatures, no movement indicators. But something is definitely out there." On the Coalition side, Colonel Sarachon was monitoring Kethvar communications with growing amazement. Whatever was happening to their forces, it was creating exactly the kind of confusion and panic that might give her people a chance. "Ma'am," her communications officer called out, "you need to hear this." Sarah moved to the comm station, where intercepted Kethvar transmissions were painting a picture of an enemy force under attack by ghosts. "Weapons just fell apart in our hands. Never saw anything, but Jenkins is unconscious, and his rifle is sliced into perfect cubes. The ammunition exploded, but there's no crater, no heat damage. It's like each round was detonated individually by a surgeon." "What the hell is happening out there?" Sarah muttered. Her answer came 30 minutes later, when General Thaxmore himself took to the communication channels. "Unknown attacker," his voice boomed across all frequencies. "I know you can hear this. Show yourself." The response came from directly behind him. "Hello, Thaxmore." The general spun around to find a young human standing on his command platform, somehow having bypassed a dozen layers of security, without triggering a single alarm. The human wore simple gray fatigues and carried an ancient sword that seemed to drink light rather than reflect it. Impossible d'accès breted. The platform is 20 meters above the ground. The approaches are all monitored. Marcus looked at the Kethvar general with eyes that held the weight of 1,000 battles. Your sensors are designed to detect normal threats. I stopped being normal a long time ago. Around the platform, Kethvar's soldiers raised their weapons, but Thaxmore held up a hand to stop them. He was a veteran warrior himself, and something about the human's presence set off every survival instinct he possessed. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Marcus Chun, Earth Defense Force, 1st Special Operations Regiment." Marcus's voice was conversational, almost friendly. "That's my sister you're threatening down there." "Ah," Thaxmore said, understanding beginning to dawn. "The famous Colonel Chun. I can see the family resemblance." "Can you?" Marcus asked mildly. "Because most people say we're nothing alike. She's the hero. I'm the weapon." The general studied the young human more carefully. There was something about his stillness that reminded Thaxmore of the moment before an avalanche, when a mountain holds its breath before unleashing devastation. "What do you want?" Thaxmore asked. "I want you to let those people go," Marcus said simply. "All of them. Right now." Thaxmore laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "One human against 10,000 of my warriors? You've lost your mind." "Have I?" Marcus asked. He gestured around the platform at the various displays showing Kethvar positions. Half of them were dark, their units reporting equipment failures and personnel losses. "How many of your soldiers have I killed in the last hour?" Thaxmore checked his tactical display, frowning. "According to these reports, none. But you've disabled 37 positions and neutralized over 400 of my troops." "Exactly. I haven't killed anyone yet. But that's about to change if you don't release those hostages." "You're bluffing," Thaxmore said, but his voice lacked conviction. "No one human could threaten an entire army." Marcus smiled, and the expression was so cold that several of the nearby guards took involuntary steps backward. "General, do you know why Earth doesn't start wars?" "Because humans are weak," Thaxmore replied automatically, though he was beginning to doubt his own words. "No," Marcus said softly, "because we finish them. And when a human decides that a war needs to end, it ends, one way or another." He drew his sword slowly, and the ancient blade seemed to sing as it tasted the air. The metal gleamed with an inner light that hurt to look at directly. "Last chance," Marcus said. "Release the hostages." Thaxmore's hand moved to his own weapon, a plasma rifle capable of melting through tank armor. "I have 10,000 soldiers, human. What do you have?" Marcus looked at him with those dark eyes that held depths no young face should contain. "I have a sword," he said simply, "and 800 years of my family's promise that some things are worth dying for. The question is, are your conquests worth your entire army dying for?" The general raised his rifle, energy already beginning to build in the charging chamber. "You're insane if you think." He never finished the sentence. Marcus moved like liquid lightning, his sword tracing an arc through the air that seemed to cut reality itself. The plasma rifle fell in two perfect halves, its energy cell somehow drained without exploding. "I disabled your perimeter teams because they were just following orders," Marcus said conversationally, his blade now resting against Thaxmore's throat. The edge was so sharp that the general could feel it parting individual molecules of air. "But if those hostages aren't released in the next 60 seconds, I'm going to start taking this personally." Around the platform, dozens of Kethvar soldiers aimed their weapons at Marcus, but none of them dared fire with their general in the line of fire. "You kill me, and they'll slaughter every civilian on this plateau," Thaxmore said through gritted teeth. "Will they?" Marcus asked mildly. "Or will they be too busy trying to stay alive themselves?" The general's eyes widened as he finally understood what he was facing. "You really would fight all of them, wouldn't you? 10,000 soldiers by yourself." "If I have to," Marcus confirmed. "Though I suspect it won't come to that." Your soldiers are smart enough to recognize a losing battle when they see one. This is madness, Thaxmore whispered. No, Marcus said quietly. This is what happens when someone threatens my family. The sword pressed a fraction deeper, and the general felt a trickle of blood run down his neck. 30 seconds, Marcus announced. In the coalition command post, Colonel Sarah Chun watched the confrontation through long-range sensors, her heart pounding as she recognized the figure standing with a blade to the enemy general's throat. Marcus, she whispered, what have you done to yourself? But she already knew the answer. Her brother had become exactly what their family had always been capable of becoming, if they were pushed far enough. The Chens had been warriors for 800 years, and sometimes warriors had to become something more terrible than their enemies. Time's up, Marcus said softly. General Thaxmore closed his eyes, expecting to feel the blade complete its work. Instead, he heard his own voice giving the order he had never intended to give. Release the hostages, he said over the communication link. All units stand down and allow civilian evacuation to proceed. Marcus stepped back, his sword sliding into its sheath with a whisper of metal on leather. Thank you, General, he said politely. You've made the right choice. The quantum crystal mines of Zirian, 7 stretched deep into the planet's crust, a network of tunnels and chambers that held enough energy to fuel a galactic war for centuries. Captain Vexhai and his remaining team stood at the main entrance, watching coalition demolition experts place their final charges. It had been 18 hours since Marcus had vanished to confront the Kethvar hostage situation. In that time, the civilian evacuation had completed successfully, and coalition forces had begun their own withdrawal from the planet. Only one task remained: denying the crystal mines to the enemy. Charges are set, reported the demolition chief, a grizzled human engineer named Rodriguez. When these blow, it'll collapse the entire tunnel system. The Kethvar will need decades to dig new access shafts. Vethai notet vili. How long until detonation? 2 hours. Remote detonation from orbit once our forces are clear of the blast zone. The captain looked around at what remained of his mercenary team. Zaranuz was there, her 4 eyes constantly scanning the perimeter for threats. Krog stood like a mountain beside her, his massive form somehow managing to appear tired despite his incredible endurance. 2 of the 3 Centauri brothers had survived, their scaled faces showing the strain of constant combat. They had lost good fighters over the past day. The mission had cost them more than anyone had expected, but they had succeeded beyond their wildest hopes. The civilians were safe, the mines would be destroyed, and the Kethvar invasion had been thrown into chaos. But Marcus was still missing. Any word from our human friend? Krog rumbled. Vexhai shook his head. Nothing since he confronted General Thaxmore. Coalition sensors lost track of him after the hostage situation was resolved. He could be dead, observed one of the Centauri brothers. Or he could be hunting, Zaranuz said quietly. I've been monitoring Kethvar communications. Their forces are in complete disarray. Units are reporting equipment failures, missing personnel, and mysterious attacks all across the continent. Something is systematically dismantling their entire military presence on this planet. One human, Krog asked skeptically. Not just any human, Vexhai corrected. We all saw what he could do. If Marcus Chun decided to wage a one-man war against the Kethvar, I wouldn't bet against him. The sound of approaching aircraft interrupted their conversation. Coalition dropships were beginning the final evacuation of military personnel from the mining complex. Soon, only the demolition charges would remain to mark humanity's presence on Zirian 7. Time to go, Rodriguez announced. We need to be in orbit before those charges blow. The team began moving toward the evacuation craft, but Vexhai lingered at the mine entrance. Something felt unfinished, as if leaving without Marcus was abandoning a crucial part of their mission. Captain, Zaranuz called from the loading ramp. We have to go. Vexhai took one last look at the crystalline caverns below, then turned to follow his team. As he reached the dropship, a figure emerged from the shadows at the mine entrance. Marcus Chin walked toward them with the same unhurried pace he had maintained throughout the mission. His gray fatigues were torn in several places, and there were new scars on his hands and arms, but his eyes held a clarity that hadn't been there before. The terrible stillness that had defined him was gone, replaced by something that might have been peace. "Room for one more?" he asked as he approached the loading ramp. "Marcus," Zaranuz exclaimed, "where have you been?" "Finishing things," he replied simply, settling into a seat near the back of the craft. "The Kethvar forces?" Vexai asked. "No longer a threat to this system," Marcus confirmed. "General Thaxmore has withdrawn his remaining troops to their command ships in orbit. They'll be gone within the hour." The dropship lifted off, carrying the last coalition forces away from Zirian 7. Through the viewports, they could see the Kethvar fleet beginning to move away from the planet, their invasion abandoned. "Ow!" Krog asked. "How did you convince an entire army to retreat?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, his hand resting on his sword's grip. "I reminded them that some victories cost more than they're worth. And they just believed you," one of the Centauri brothers pressed. "Actions speak louder than words," Marcus replied. "I spent the night demonstrating what would happen to their forces if they stayed." By dawn, General Thaxmore decided that the quantum crystals weren't worth fighting a war of attrition against someone who could disable his entire army one soldier at a time. Zaranuz studied the human with her 4 eyes, noting the changes in his posture and expression. "You're different." The silence is gone. Marcus nodded slowly. "I remembered what I was fighting for. That makes all the difference." "And what were you fighting for?" Vexai asked. "My sister," Marcus said simply. "The civilians on those transports. The idea that some things are worth protecting, even if it costs everything to do it." The dropship shook as it reached orbit, joining the coalition evacuation fleet. Below them, Zirian 7 turned slowly in space, its crystal mines waiting for their final moment. 2 minutes to detonation came the announcement from the fleet command ship. Marcus stood and moved to a viewport, watching the planet below. His teammates joined him, all of them thinking about the battles they had fought and the friends they had lost. "Do you think it was worth it?" Zaranuz asked. "All the fighting, all the death, just to deny resources to the enemy?" "The fighting wasn't about resources," Marcus replied. "It was about choice. Those civilians on the transports now have the choice to live their lives in freedom instead of slavery. The coalition worlds will have the choice to defend themselves instead of being overwhelmed by superior firepower. That's always worth fighting for. Even if it breaks you," she pressed. Marcus looked at her with eyes that no longer held the terrible emptiness of before. "Especially then, because sometimes being broken is how you discover what you're really made of." The mines detonated in a flash that lit up the night side of the planet. Massive explosions rippled through the crystal deposits, creating a chain reaction that could be seen from orbit. Within minutes, centuries of geological formation had been reduced to rubble, denying the Kethvar the resources they needed to fuel their war machine. "It's done," Vexai said quietly. The coalition fleet began its jump to hyperspace, leaving Zirian 7 behind. But as the ships prepared to depart, a message came through on all frequencies. "This is General Thaxmore of the Kethvar Empire," the alien voice announced. To the human known as Marcus Chun, and to the coalition forces who fought with such honor, this battle is ended. You have proven that the cost of conquest can exceed its value. The Kethvar withdraw from this system with respect for worthy opponents. Marcus listened to the transmission without emotion, but Vexai noticed that his hand had finally moved away from his sword's grip. "He's calling a ceasefire?" Krog asked in amazement. "More than that," Vexai realized. "He's acknowledging defeat. In Kethvar culture, that's equivalent to a formal peace treaty." One human did that, Zaranuz marveled. One human with an ancient sword convinced an entire invasion force to withdraw. Not just any human, Marcus corrected quietly. A human who remembered what his family has always known, that some things are worth any sacrifice to protect. The transport ship Meridian jumped to hyperspace, carrying its crew away from Zirian 7 and toward whatever new conflicts awaited them among the stars. But the story of the silent human who had changed the course of a war would spread throughout the galaxy, reminding all who heard it that sometimes the most powerful weapons are those that choose when to be used. In the cargo hold, Marcus Chun sat in the same corner where he had maintained his vigil during the journey to Zirian 7. But now he was no longer alone. His teammates sat nearby, sharing stories of the battles they had fought and the bonds they had forged. "What will you do now?" Vexhai asked as they settled in for the long journey home. Marcus considered the question carefully. "Return to Earth, I think. My sister will want to know I'm all right. And there are things I need to tell her about what our family is and why that matters." "Will you stay retired?" Zaranuz asked. Marcus looked out the viewport at the stars rushing past in hyperspace. "There will always be conflicts that need someone willing to step forward. People who need protecting. Bullies who need to be reminded that their strength has limits." "So you'll keep fighting?" "When it's necessary," Marcus confirmed. "But not because I have to anymore. Because I choose to." His hand found the grip of his sword one more time, and his teammates saw that the ancient blade no longer seemed like a burden he carried. It had become what it was always meant to be, a tool in the hands of someone who understood its true purpose. The universe was vast and full of dangers, but it was also full of people worth protecting. And as long as that remained true, warriors like Marcus Chun would be ready to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. Some fights were worth everything, and some humans were born knowing that truth in their bones. The silent human had found his voice at last, and the galaxy would never be quite the same. In the years that followed, the story of Zirian 7 would become legend. Military academies would study the tactics used by a single human with an ancient sword to defeat a modern army. Philosophers would debate the ethics of violence in service of protection. Artists would create works inspired by the idea that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe is someone who cares enough to act. But Marcus Chun himself would return to Earth, to a quiet life with his sister and the sword that had been passed down through 8 centuries of his family's history. He would tend a small garden, teach martial arts to neighborhood children, and try to forget the terrible things he had learned about himself on distant battlefields. Until the day when duty called again, and the silent human would once more lift his sword to change the course of history. Because some promises are kept not just in words, but in action. And the Chen family had been keeping the same promise for 800 years, that some things are worth any sacrifice to protect. The battlefield had changed, but the warrior remained the same, and that perhaps was the most human thing of all. Faxmore stared at the human in amazement. "Why, you had me. You could have ended this." Marcus looked toward the evacuation ships, where thousands of people were beginning to move towards safety. "Because this was never about killing you," he said simply. "It was about saving them." As the civilian transports began lifting off, Marcus walked to the edge of the platform and prepared to disappear back into the night. But Faxmore called after him. "Human, what happens now? Do we continue this war?" Marcus paused without turning around. "That's up to you, General," he said. "But remember, I know where you live now. And if you ever threaten innocence again, I won't be so polite next time." With that, he stepped off the platform and vanished into the darkness, leaving behind an enemy army that would spend the rest of the night checking their equipment and wondering what had just happened to them. The war was far from over, but for 20,000 innocent people, it had just become survivable. And in the Coalition command post, Colonel Sarah Chan finally understood why her brother had been so afraid of himself. Some weapons were too dangerous to use, except when the alternative was losing everything worth protecting.